Thank you so much for joining us. We are looking forward to having a robust discussion on the positive disruption, using technology to change consumer habits and facilitate corporate action. And with me this afternoon, I have a very, very interesting panel of people who are going to help us have a discussion around ways that we see trends occurring, in what companies are doing, how companies are doing it, and what the consumer is demanding of companies. So we're going to have a conversation that we are going to start with. To my right, I'm going to have my panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their company and how this impacts the discussion that we're going to have this afternoon to start us off.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So my name is Boutaina Araki. I am the managing director of ClearChannel, which is an outdoor company. And actually, we are media, and we see our role around these topics of sustainability as a way of raising awareness and be, the medium for these issues to be brought to the audiences. Maybe I can.
Hi everyone, very happy to be here today. My name is Caroline Brouillette. I am a social impact strategist at a company called Credo, based in Montreal. We work with companies to integrate social environmental impact at the core of their decisions as well as business models. This year, I also had the great privilege of representing Canadian youth at the G7. Very happy to see fellow delegates in the audience today, Larissa and Sabrina. And so we urged G7 governments to protect all bodies of water through action on plastics. And this has a big link with the fashion industry. Because as I'm sure you all know, some fibers, synthetic fibers, are made from petroleum. They're plastic-based, so polyester, nylon, elastan, and I could go on. When you wash them in your washing machine, the fabric breaks down, and they're so small the sewage system doesn't recuperate them, and they end up in the ocean. They actually constitute up to 85% of microplastics found in the ocean. So the fashion industry also has a big role to play to address the plastics crisis we're in.
Very good introduction, because I'm working in the fashion industry. I'm Isabelle Capron, International Vice President at ICICLE. ICICLE is a Chinese Shanghai-based fashion brand who is a key player in high-end ready-to-wear for women and men, and who set up a design center in Paris 5 years ago, and who will go international next year. So I'll be happy to talk about how this Shanghai-based brand has developed a quite unique fashion philosophy based on the natural making of the clothes.
Hi, I'm Susan Hart. I work with Spencer Stuart. We're a leadership advisory services firm, and I lead our retail practice, so we spend a lot of time talking to CEOs and boards about how they can improve the sustainability of their fashion companies. And I'd like to give a big shout out to the rising women leaders, both who were awarded, but also those in the audience, because we need more of you in the CEO suite, and the millennial young women are really pushing the sustainability topic. So thank you.
Great, welcome. I'm going to address my first question to Caroline, and I love that you took the initiative to bring your own audience. I think that's one of the things that we have gotten out of what millennials are doing. When you go, you bring your audience in your cheerleading section. So I'm going to take note of that the next time I go somewhere. You talked about reducing the elements in the ocean and the plastics in the ocean. Can you talk a little bit about what the detriments are, to educate some of our folks in the audience about what the benefits of reducing that are, and what the connection is between retail and the pollutants in the water and the sustainable actions that you're trying to initiate?
Sure. So as we see fast fashion trying to make cheaper clothes, they are using cheaper fabrics to produce these clothes. And as I said earlier, synthetic fabrics are mostly made from plastic. We are often wearing plastic without knowing that. So we hear a lot about straws, about plastic water bottles, but one thing we talk a bit less about is the plastics in our clothing. So first we need to switch to natural fabrics, and I'm sure Isabelle can maybe build on that a bit later. But I think another important part of when we talk about sustainability in fashion is integrating sustainability at the core of business models, because even if we have a clothing item, made out of sustainable or natural fabrics, the reality is that the trend cycle moves so fast nowadays. Some companies have a trend cycle as short as 2 weeks. This means fast fashion companies have 26 seasons per year. I come from Canada, where the weather changes a lot, and I can tell you I don't need to renew my wardrobe 26 times per year. So we need to lengthen that trend cycle. And how to do that is to think of clothes as something that is not only going to be determined by a trend. I was telling my French co-panelists earlier that my grandmother used to tell me that French women, they buy one suit, one really nice suit, and they wear it all of their life. Unfortunately, we're seeing less and less of these types of clothes that we cherish, take the time to buy, and that we'll wear all of our lives, whether the fashion changes or not. And the companies, the fashion companies who will be successful in the future are the ones who are going to produce for timelessness, for quality, rather than for something we want now and throw away the next day. And I think ICICLE is a great example of a company who puts sustainability right at the center of their business model.
Thank you, Carolyn. Isabelle, your company was ahead of the curve. You're not new to this game. You're not new to sustainability. You were doing sustainable clothing and retail before there was a demand for it. Can you talk about how this came about, what the vision was, and where you are now in terms of your productions?
Yes, with pleasure. I want to say first that what is quite original in the ICICLE story, which is a new fashion story, a new Chinese fashion story, is that it speaks about the new made in China, and why there is today a new made in China in terms of fashion, which is ahead of trends. It's because China has faced tremendous challenges, ecological challenges, much before the Western countries. It started in the 90s, so the new with the massive urbanization of China. So, and there has been in this period a new generation of entrepreneurs who are very enlightened and who thought that they had to be more virtuous in the way they were doing their business. So they decided from the beginning to be very sustainable, and the more sustainable as possible, because it's difficult to be 100% sustainable, of course, but to be the more sustainable possible since the beginning. So it means that they were truly eco-born, which is not the case of a lot of other companies. We have to shift, we have to switch. So they are truly eco-born from the beginning. The other thing which is interesting concerning this company is that with the awakening and the new rise of China, there is also this idea of the new generation to circle back to very deep Chinese roots, which are, in fact, which everybody forgot, but which are which are a lot linked to the harmony between man and nature. So this is the vision, is to say that in fact they would like in expansion of the brand, like the Japanese, I'm thinking of Uniqlo or Muji before, they would like to convey new Oriental values for an international target and awaken, in fact, the women and the men and, of course, the new generation, which are already much more sensitive to sustainability and willing to pay more. To have a sustainable clothing, piece of clothing, and to awaken them to this matter. So this is, but this is wording. In fact, since the beginning, how are they sustainable? They are sustainable because throughout the whole value chain, they really make clothing in a durable and sustainable way with respect with the environment. Some examples, for instance, the fabrics, the materials are 100% natural and of very high quality. The dyeing processes, which is one of the most polluting aspects in the fashion industry, is done with a lot of care, which means that a lot of clothes are undyed or dyed naturally with plants or vegetables, which we can do. You know, you can dye beautifully with onion, with tea, with indigo, etc. So the dyeing process is really very carefully managed. The second thing is that the design, this is the second step, how you design your clothes. The design is very minimal. It's a very clean design without any unnecessarily details, which makes the clothes more complicated to produce with more waste. So this is very important in the fact that the design produces less waste as possible. The third thing is the manufacturing process. So the company owns his own manufacturer, which is a better way to control waste. There's an advanced, a lot of advanced machines, which also allow the clothes to be the material to be less wasted. There is energy management recycling in the factories. Also, the workers' conditions are much better than in other companies. And then there's the transportation, which is as eco as possible, with no plastic on the garments. And then in the end of the retail, of the distribution of the product, because they have 250 stores in China, all the material used are completely sustainable and recyclable, like wood, like stone, like bamboo. The packagings are totally biodegradable. There is a tote bag which is reusable, etc., etc. And then the step after is that there is an education of the customer, which is how can you make these clothes last longer? And we have a lot of tips, like how you press the clothes, how you mend them, how you refresh them, how you embroider them so that they can have a new life, etc., etc. So the educational part is also as important as the rest.
Thank you, Isabelle. I want to pick up on that a little bit. One of the things I was reading what said that the average millennial spends 8 seconds. So you have an 8-second attention span on advertising before you lose that. Educating consumers who are not already convinced of the need for sustainable clothing takes a little longer than 8 seconds. So, Boutaina, I'd like to ask you, how does ClearChannel participate and help your customers in this process of changing mindset, influencing consumers, and moving the needle?
Yeah, I think this question is absolutely crucial. Actually, one of the phenomena around the fast fashion is the fact that especially the millennials are very willing to change clothes all the time. And this is a trend. It is the fashion to change fashion, you know? And the way to reach these audiences and to convince them that maybe they can behave differently is a very important matter. Our view on that is that we are a medium that addresses a lot of audiences. We are probably the last mass media. We can reach a very diverse audience and bring our message to them. And the thing that is for us a good key is how we can make it more fashionable to use low fashion than fast fashion. How we can reverse the process in a way. How we can influence different behaviors so that millennials, for example, would see that as more trendy to have clothes of quality and so on, rather than to have fast fashion. And the thing that is very important is that millennials, if we can say that, and I hate to summarize millennials like that, but just say our society, we have two trends actually. At the same time, we want to consume more and very fast, but at the same time, the most of us are more and more sensitive around some very important values, whether around the sustainability, around preserving the wildlife in the oceans or in the forests and everywhere. And so if we can talk to that part in the mind, brains of our audiences, we can convince them that they can behave differently. And this is where we see our role as a medium. This is how we can talk to these people and bring messages and sensitize around these topics. So, for example, explain what you explained before around how we have synthetic components in our clothes. Most of us, we don't know that. And actually, if we are just saying that to our audiences, just explaining how by their behaviors they are impacting the environment, and more importantly, how by behaving differently they can have a positive impact, then we can probably make them change their behavior. So that is something we believe very much.
Great, thank you. And that leads directly to something I'd like to talk to Susan about, which is how do you have companies exemplify their values and their values around sustainability? And at Russell Reynolds, you're on the forefront of placing people on boards and placing.
I'm actually at Spencer Stuart.
I'm sorry.
We were talking about her Russell Reynolds friends earlier.
We were just doing.
Sorry.
Do we know each other with different people? I'm so sorry.
That's fine.
So being at the forefront of identifying companies, leadership, C-suite, board positions, working with these companies, what are you seeing in terms of trends around sustainability, and are they looking for chief sustainability officers? Are they looking for people to serve on boards who bring that experience to leadership? What's the value, and how are they communicating what they're hearing from their consumers and translating that internally into how they're structuring?
Well, it's a great complex question, but a great one. And I love the term eco-born because so many of our clients are not eco-born. So the CEOs who lead these companies have to be able to create a sustainability culture that isn't mandated. It's really infiltrated through the whole organization. And so to do that, they have to put accountability and measurements on sustainability factors and advancements just the way they do with financial goals for a company. And some great companies in the retail sector have done that. Chanel sent out a report just this year talking about how they were going to reduce carbon emissions in their plants and in their transportation and have their retail stores be more LEED certified. And they put measurable percentages and they put dates that they would accomplish those things. So I think it is certainly what we hear from the CEOs we work with in this industry is that it's important that they do this for not just the reasons of creating a company that has a good impact on the environment, but it's also a good financial impact because it's a better employee proposition. People want to work for a company that cares about what they do and has a purpose. And the consumers, they do read and they see what is and isn't working with a brand. One example, when you were talking about the dyes, Levi's has for many years stone-washed their denim, which is a lot of water and a lot of chemicals. So it was through a chief sustainability officer who brought to the attention of the product development team, perhaps could they think about different ways of improving that process and getting the same outcome? And they created a laser process that gave us the same stone-washed look, but use much less water and chemicals. So it was a win for the company, it was a boom for the business, and at the same time they said, you can also bring your old jeans back in and we'll retailer them for you, which you also do at your company, update it. So rather than recycling them, bring them back in and we'll refit them. So I think there's a lot of ways that companies can do this, even non-eco-born companies, but become that way. And then to answer your last question about boards, I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that we have in the work that we've looked at on this subject, is that boards of directors and CEOs are always first and foremost building shareholder value, but companies, again, are looking at what they're doing from a sustainability standpoint. So there was a study done in Sweden that talked about, Switzerland, sorry, that talked about investors looking at more of the sustainability aspects of a business and how are the executives being measured against that in their compensation plans, which I think is very interesting. So I think we'll see more of that coming out when you look at how executives are paid. And then the second piece of it, in the United States, we looked at the S&P 500 and we interviewed a large number of individuals who chair the nominating and governance committees of their boards, and we asked, what is the trait or the characteristic or the profile you look for most in a board member, and what is the least? And so ESG came out absolute dead last, but the number one was women, more women on boards, but no real regard for looking for profiles of people who have proven sustainability track records, which doesn't just mean a chief sustainability officer. It means CEOs of companies that have lived this. So I think that's a real opportunity for all of us that are able to affect that thinking, is to get our CEOs and to get others of influencers in the company to really ask, who's on our board pushing this governance agenda too?
And I think that the opportunity is for the consumer also to drive those questions being asked. And I think that if the consumers are demanding it, then sometimes that's the way that the board and leadership responds.
I'd just like to add, because you were speaking a lot about fast fashion, of course, but the curve of fast fashion is very interesting because the peak was in 2007. Now it depends, of course, but it's questioned by the new generation, and I think that it would take time. I mean, if you see what happened in the food sector. The true conscience of it started in the 80s with the slow fashion, with the slow food movement. So and since then, it's been now 30 years. It's growing and growing and growing. See what's happening in this area. So I think that the same will absolutely happen in the fashion. This is my strong conviction. With the pushed by the new generation. And enlightened CEO and more board members.
And I think I'd like to throw out, what's the role of social media in changing that? And the fact that people are talking about using disruptors, like Rent the Runway, as an option for clothing. People are on social media. So if you're on social media, your outfits are shown more often. How much is that driving the need to have more and more clothes, and how much is it driving the need to look at other alternatives and options?
I think when we talk about media, social media, as well as culture generally, where there's an opportunity is to change that culture of giving the example of never wearing the same dress at an event, right? Influencers can play a big role of saying, hey, I'm re-wearing this, or this was given to me by my mother, or I have this from a long time ago, I bought it in a thrift shop. We need those examples. But I think we focus a lot on consumer demand. The question often asked is, why aren't consumers asking for more ethical fashion? I'd like to reframe that question a bit in terms of what does it take for all companies to act with minimum standards, both ethical and sustainable.
that kind of goes to one of the panels yesterday, the New York Times debate. You know, is it business, is it corporate, or is it government?
Yeah.
And whose responsibility?
Yeah, and on this note, Isabelle and Boutaina and I were having a great conversation before this panel started, thinking that consumers are also citizens. So yes, they have purchasing power and they buy goods from competing businesses, but they also have the power to influence their governments. And we really don't have to forget that part, because especially on the climate change issue, we need to move fast. And consumer preferences tend to take a lot of time. I was talking to a lady yesterday and she told me this, winning slowly on the climate change front is losing. We need to move fast. Consumer demand changing, this takes a long time. Legislation also takes a long time, and that's okay. And business has an opportunity to act between those periods of time, taking the leadership and truly walking the talk on sustainability.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, yeah, I agree. And actually, the business has an opportunity to move faster. They can move faster if there's a profit, because unfortunately the business works around profit. So the role of the consumers is there very crucial. I agree with you. Consumers are citizens, obviously. And for example, for us, whenever we speak in the streets, whenever we use our devices, our screens in the streets, we always keep in mind that we are talking at the same time to the consumers and to the citizen. And that is very interesting, because for the brands, for example, when they speak to their audiences, they are as well addressing the two people that we have, all of us, inside of us. And one opportunity, I mean, it goes the two-way round, so in the two ways. If the consumers and the citizens are motivated and very sensitive to these points, they can have a massive influence on the brands. And for the brands today, and to come to the point of Suzanne before, some companies are doing fantastic actions, trying to be more sustainable or have more ethical approach on their production, manufacturing, and so on. And these companies have a real need to make their story known. You know, it's not just about doing right things; it's how I can make a difference on the market for what I'm doing as a corporation. And our media is also there for that, not only to do advertising. Obviously, this is part of our business. It's not a question, but really is to say, if I am Chanel, to come back to your points, if I am Chanel, how I can make a difference. Obviously, I make fantastic products and I am a luxury company and so on. But what makes the difference between me and Louis Vuitton or Christian Dior or anyone else like that? And to tell that story that is about the values and so on, this is a story we can tell in the streets. We can browse content and videos now in the streets. And again, it's about talking to the largest audience and give that story to the audiences so that the consumer and the citizen at the same time are raising awareness, and then they can make some choices that are not just about the product, but about the values they are committing to when they make their buying action.
So can I make a comment about that? Because I think that's a really important point. Tiffany is a company that 10 years ago made the decision to vertically integrate their processes. So they don't own the mines that they mine from, but they selected the mines that they would choose to work with. They selected the workshops in places like Botswana that they would work with. And then they made a commitment to hire 98% of their employees locally, train them, and pay them a living wage. But that's nowhere in the advertisement of the beautiful blue box, which is still beautiful. But I think we're going to see a trend, again, from the companies that are not eco-born, that they're going to have to be bringing that forward, because things like that are remarkable and should be better known to the consumer.
And to come back to your point, they can move much faster. I mean, the businesses can go very much faster than governments, obviously. And they can have an influence on the governments as well, and make the laws change, and make the decision be taken at the highest level.
Perhaps on that point, in a political context, such as the one we know right now, when the business voice speaks in a united way, that has a lot of impact on politicians.
And what about when the consumers speak in a united way and through organized efforts, through organizations, NGOs that are really calling for social action and calling for corporations to take better stewardship of the environment? How's that going to impact decisions that are being made on all levels?
No, I mean, to be very business orientated, because as you said, it has to be profitable, but there's a new sustainable way to be profitable. What is interesting with the ICICLE company is that the company is targeting the new urban professionals. I mean, everybody here. So it means that it's a very commercial brand. It's not a niche brand. So it's going to be a big voice in the future. It's already a big voice in China. So, and the idea is that every future business leader who will make the choice of wearing the brand will be an ambassador, because this very person has a lot of impact on the others. And this is community management. It's not only wild social media, as we all know. You know, it's a real, this is why ICICLE is here today. It's because we want to impact the future business woman leaders. And hopefully by also providing them a very elegant, hopefully, and natural, very comfortable wardrobe of luxury essentials made in a very natural and sustainable way. So there's a personal benefit, which is well-being, because what is interesting in fashion is that well-being is the new looking well. You know, it's if you want to look beautiful, you have to feel well, which is a very new philosophy. I mean, regarding the Western or French philosophy of you have to suffer to be beautiful. So it's interesting to work on the comfort, but this comfort has to be sustainable and has to be the best partner of the new leading woman.
I'd like to talk, or have you talk a little bit about your recent acquisition, about the major fashion house that you've acquired.
So ICICLE recently took over the Carven, French fashion house, who I hope you all know. It's a beautiful brand with a beautiful history. And in fact, ICICLE Group took over this brand with the know-how of this brand, not to make it a Chinese brand. And this is also why I was talking about enlightened new leaders who have a worldwide vision of what should be a fashion group, meaning that there's a space for a brand such as ICICLE to be, let's say, a timeless, beyond trends fashion brand, but also a fashion house, very French typical, because a French fashion house they will help to revive. And there again, very paradoxically, they will bring value to the Capron house. How? By bringing the quality of their high-level, nearly luxury materials to the brand, which is not the case right now. So there's a lot of couture, there's a lot of know-how, there's a lot of style, etc., but there's not the level of the quality that we can wait from a fashion house, a French fashion house. And the idea is really to balance the business between Asia also and the Western countries. By having an Asian brand, a Chinese brand going international, but again, it's not ethnical Chinese, it's international Chinese going international, and a French fashion house who will go back international because it was currently going bankruptcy, and with the benefit of the Chinese growth.
And also being environmentally friendly.
Totally. So in fact, ICICLE will bring Carven, which, by the way, symbol color is green. ICICLE will bring the sustainability to Calvin. So it's an interesting exchange. Huh? It's a win-win strategy.
Can I ask a question without putting you on the spot on this? But do you put all of your same sustainability efforts into everything you do at your corporate office and how you behave on that front as a company, not just in what you produce, but how you live every day inside your company walls?
Absolutely, we try to do the best, and if you visit Shanghai, I'll be happy to welcome you. No, to see that the company in its, in the way they behave, in the way they provide a beautiful environment to the employees, about how they provide also housing to the workers, you know, how all the materials in the company are totally sustainable, and the way they treat people, you know, it's they're amazingly truly ethical. I mean, this is why I'm talking about New China, because when you talk about China, everybody has a lot of stereotypes, which of course still exists. But I really want to say that there is a new China which is raising, and it's coming.
I think the example of ICICLE to me really illustrates the new way of doing business that we're seeing. Perhaps some of you have heard of the B Corp movement, where businesses get certified and they have to change their legal incorporation status to, rather than create value for only their shareholders, they become liable to creating value to all their stakeholders, so clients, providers, employees, communities, as well as the environment. And that's really what I'm hearing from ICICLE, is that you care about your employees, you care about the environment, as well as the clients who will buy these timeless pieces of fashion.
We try every day harder. I'm not saying it's easy, but this is really the DNA of the brand.
Susan, what do you think from the perspective of sitting on the board of the National Retail Foundation? What are you seeing in terms of trends with all retailers? And I'm thinking specifically of retailers such as Walmart, who are very, very large and who have a very large market share, and a lot of the apparel that they purchase is from China, and not necessarily the quality that ICICLE is producing.
Well, just speaking broadly and not specifically about Walmart, this is an issue that all of the retail companies are talking about, whether they're vertically integrated themselves or they're buying product from other manufacturers. And I think that's the real piece where the pressure is on for companies like Walmart that do produce their own but do also purchase from other vendors. Their standards and what their expectations are out of their vendors, they will shut down a vendor if they believe that. And it's not just the natural resources. That's a very important one, but it's also about wages. It's about the whole cycle of how that product is affected before it would get to the doors of their store. So it's very powerful, and again, a lot of it's been driven through the social media, through customers and feedback, which is instantaneous and far-reaching, and then the employee population. I mean, it's the employee proposition, the employer proposition as a company is the difference between getting not just the younger generation, but all generations to choose to work there or not. And so the pressure, I think employees can have a great pressure on their companies in a positive way. And sometimes it's just a matter of education if you're not, again, born to it naturally. So that's a very important piece of it. And again, it has to keep pushing up. And things like adding on a chief sustainability officer, you know, that's really, it's important, but it has to have more meat to it than just that, because everybody knows in a company you can't just mandate something and put a person in a role and expect results. It has to be something that's threaded through the whole organization, but a start of someone that's in those roles. And supply chain is really, it's interesting. We talk about worrying about a chief sustainability officer reporting to the CEO. A more important relationship is with the chief supply chain officer, because that's where it's all happening. And if they can put that together and they build a relationship that's a win-win, and there's also innovation that comes out of it, which then leads to profitability, I mean, that's where the cycle is really going to really be meaningful over time.
That's a great point. And on that point, I want to close by having an action item. And we've been asked to close every session by committing to something, or at least identifying something, one action that we can take from our perspective that will help advance and move the needle on this. So I'm going to ask each of you to think and name, what do you think the most impactful thing that we can do at this point in time is to change the needle from your perspective?
You want me to start?
Whoever would like to start can jump in.
Yeah, I think it has been mentioned, but for me, education is really absolutely crucial here. So for me, it's about continuing to talk about it again and again, and also engage conversation, because the power of doing things differently, and Caroline is probably a fantastic illustration of that. The power is in our hands, all of us, as consumers, as citizens, as employers, and as employees. And by bringing that conversation and also understanding how much the addition of all of us is very powerful. Obviously, it's not about you, me, individually. It's really about the mass of common vision on things that can bring the change. So continue to bring the conversation, engage the discussion, and push for positive action around these topics.
So in typical Youth 7 manner, I will have a bold call to action for everyone, and that will be to remember that sustainability shouldn't be about selling a side initiative or a capsule collection at a premium, but rather sustainability should be in everything we sell and everything we buy.
I agree with the education, and it should start with children. So I would say create a course which is called sustainability, and which will be as important as mathematics for the future.
I like that. That's very bold. Well, I think from our personally, I should stop buying things so that aren't sustainable, and I mean that very seriously, and looking more carefully at that because that's important. And then I think from a professional standpoint, I think it's our responsibility in the seat that we sit in at our firm is to ask that question of the boards that we work with, analyze them, look at them, and say, where is the person who is most bringing that cause to the table at every board meeting?
That's great. I'd like to thank all of my panelists. I want to have a chance to have a few questions from the audience before we wrap up. I think we have somebody who might be willing to come around with a microphone. Do we have any questions?
Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much. I thought that what you were saying was very inspiring. I'm definitely going to be following ICICLE because I love the way you are producing. I love your state of mind. I just love everything about you. My question is, and it may seem a bit candid, when are we going to have corporations in the world of fashion or anything else that is sustainable that have products that have a price that everybody can buy? Because the more we are who can buy all of these sustainable products, the more organic lands we'll be able to have, the more organic, sustainable best practices we'll be able to implement. But if you keep everything at a really high price, only a few people can buy them. It's not the mass market, it's not the middle class people who'll be able to buy them. It's only going to be the upper class, rich people. And I personally buy, when I can, organic. We have a brand, a French brand called Ekiog, which is also in the same style of ICICLE. And I buy only organic food, but it has a price, and which means that my budget is like dedicated to like food and the few clothes that I can buy. And if we can have democratize everything like that, I mean, the more we will be able to implement these sustainable practices, and the more influence we'll be able to bring around. So when will that day happen is my question.
Who would like to take that?
I may have an answer. I actually agree with you that sustainability needs to be thought of at the same time as access, because we all know that it sometimes we pay a premium for buying something that was made by an artisan or that was made sustainably. So that's where I think the citizen role is really important, so that the government can legislate and have all companies answer to minimum ethical standards. And it shouldn't be a luxury to have something that's not made by a child laborer or something that is not polluting the environment. That shouldn't be a luxury.
Susan, I know Susan's got to run to a plane. She's trying to catch a 6 o'clock flight. And so I'm going to excuse Susan so she can run out. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And I'm going to take... I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone else have a question? Well, we must have been really effective in communicating all of the messages around this topic. And I thank my panelists for their knowledge, for their expertise, and for their commitment to really making this something that is going to be an actionable item moving forward.
Thank you.
For being here.